I think one of the things about my work is that I'm always thinking about what I do in relationship to gardens and how they speak and work as gardens. I'm Ken Smith. I'm trained as a landscape architect, and landscape architecture is a field that deals with the environmental health of our cities, primarily our urban areas. And so I've been working on urban parks and public spaces most of my career. So this project really brings together both the ideas about environmental health of the city and the artistry of what we make and how art enriches our lives. Isabella Stewart Gardner had a very eclectic collection. I mean, basically, she traveled and acquired things. And part of my education as a landscape architect was traveling and seeing gardens and palaces and temples. And so I'm collecting ideas in the same way that Gardner was collecting art and objects and things. The first thing I did was actually visit the museum again. It had been a number of years since I had been there. And I think that the thing I really like about the collection is the eclectic mix of East and West. And I think that it is that mixing of ideas from the East and West that's sort of at the heart of what the deity is about, because the deity is, of course, an Eastern idea, but we're using it in kind of a Western way here. I very much wanted to deal with the front of the building and the relationship to the Fenway. That was very clear to me. So the deities are about protecting some realm. It's a protector of the Fens. And so I think the Fenway Deity on the front is reasserting the primacy of the historic facade, and it's really enforcing the environmental health and goodwill and beauty of the Fenway. There's also an interesting relationship between our contemporary culture and the historic collection and artifact of the museum itself. I think that the deity on the front of the building speaks to the wheel window on the back wall of the historic building. And in some ways, then all of her eclectic collection and her Asian art and Western art, that all becomes the demi-deity and sort of the spiritual wrapping around that enforces or gives power to the big deity on the front. I had been doing a series of deities since the early to mid-90s, and so I wanted to pick up on that strain of ideas that I've been working with, but I wanted to do one in a very different way than the earlier ones. And the original one was constructed out of synthetic turf and kind of these mirrored domes. And so it was not particularly tasteful. It had a certain vulgarity to it. And actually, when you go to even the traditional temples, the Buddhas are often gilded, sometimes polychromed. And so there is a certain vulgarity or flashiness to the construction of deities, even in sacred space. And so for this installation, the deity is psychedelic and actually quite strongly configured and bold. And when I first hung it on the front of the building as a drawing, it was interesting because the building has those two chimneys and it has that kind of V-shaped flue that configures the front facade. And the placement of the deity made a lot of sense at the V shape of that flue, but it sort of hung there in an odd way. And it was sort of the idea of the gold chain and actually letting it hang from the chimneys that really made it work, because it actually now is an adornment for the building. It actually hangs from the building in a way that seems kind of correct. And I wanted the deity to be essentially soft. And so the idea of doing it out of printed vinyl and inflatable, so it was kind of pillowy, really appealed to me because of the kind of inherent softness and approachability and friendliness, if you will. And I sort of imagine Isabella Stewart Gardner throwing a party and erecting the most amazing flower arrangement in the middle of the center of the museum. And in some ways, this installation is another temporary version of that same kind of celebration of garden and flowers. Clearly, some people will love it and some people will hate it, and from my perspective, that's just fine. The Fenway Deity is, in fact, a provocative act. I mean, it's provocative to do something on the front of the museum And the deed itself is not a shy gesture, because its role is really to spark a debate and make people think and talk about the museum and its relationship to the city.